Humans don't think far enough. A simple realization. But I'm now convinced it's true. Have you ever watched a science fiction film? Of course you have. Do you remember when the story took place? Was it more like the year 2286? Or was the date a 7-digit number? I bet to you that in 99% of cases, the former would be the case. Strange, isn't it? Why choose a time that our great-great-great-grandchildren might still experience, instead of stretching the future further into infinity? In my experience, the answer is fear of the unknown. We can guess what will happen on our world in the coming centuries. And that makes the genre exciting. The question, could this really happen? But the millions and billions range? That's too much for us. How many generations is that from here? Too many to keep an insignificant surname. Too many to stop biological evolution. Or synthetic. I had my first dream when my son Tom was 7. I remember that exactly, because it was going to be my last carefree day for a long time. He was a difficult child, 8% Asperger's, IQ of 132, number of friends close to 0. So we celebrated alone, just me, him, and my wife. Tom got at least a dozen books that even we didn't fully understand. He smiled, thanked everyone, and after the cake, he went into his room. It was a nice day, even though many parents might not see it that way. That night, I fell into my bed, exhausted, and thought how peaceful my world was. It was only a fragment of a splinter of an image, but it was enough to wake me up in cold sweat. Funny thing, I can't remember what I saw that day, but I still know what pajamas my wife was wearing when she asked me if everything was okay. Back then, I still thought it was a one-time exception, something everyone had once in a while. I was wrong. The dreams came from now on in irregular intervals. Sometimes I had them 3 nights in a row, and then there was peace for 2 weeks. I lost the ability to concentrate on one thing for more than 5 minutes, without thinking about what might await me next night. When I close my eyes, I can still see the image. They were never bad in a real sense, but still sharp as a knife. Most of the time, it was a deep, dark yellow desert, on the clear daytime sky, with a clearly visible moon. And there were smoking ruins on the moon. When things didn't get better, I went to a psychologist. The health insurance company could have saved themselves the money. I took the pills the doctor gave me and followed his oh-so-precious advice. But the more sessions I had with him, the more depressed I became. Yes, I drank on some evenings because I was afraid to go to bed. Once or twice I also woke up in my own piss, my throat raw from screaming at night. My boss had sent me on an unexpectedly long vacation because I fell asleep at my desk. Luckily, my wife makes a lot of money with her work as a writer. Our priority during this time was, above all, to keep all of this away from Tom. He hated it when someone in his environment was suffering. All in all, we probably managed it relatively well. If he ever asked what was wrong with me, I could always satisfy him with the answer, "Dad has a headache." At least in the beginning. The mental breakdown came in the new year, 3 days after New Year's Eve. I don't remember much about that morning, and I don't want to know either. My wife told me that I started crying and screaming when she took a yellow dress out of the closet. I spent the rest of January in the hospital without dreams, too weak to even get up. The X-rays showed nothing. The pills didn't do anything. Some days I wished they had found a tumor. something normal, explainable, but they found nothing. And when I was able to leave again, I had to go back home. My relationship with my friends deteriorated more and more. That was the time when I could only fall asleep with a nightlight because the dreams came back. And the time when I drank daily. I was a broken man. At Easter, my wife decided that it was time again to visit her mother-in-law in Florida. But just thinking about flying made me want to vomit. We argued. Aggressively. In the end, she decided that she needed time to think about us. So she flew to the States, alone with Tom. She left me alone, in this damn house, in this shitty bed. Looking back, I think she was afraid of me. Afraid that the people who crossed the street as soon as they saw us were right when they whispered the word crazy as soon as they thought I couldn't hear them anymore. You can't hide something like what I went through. The first night was bad. When I fell asleep on the couch at 4 o'clock, completely drunk, the images became faster, wilder, more painful than ever before. For the first time, I wandered through the desert. No, I flew just above the barren ground, as if through the eyes of an eagle. I noticed that it wasn't an ordinary landscape. Maybe you've never noticed, but most deserts are full of life, even if just cacti or scorpions. But this dream was empty, almost sterile, a straight yellow earth without blemish that seemed radioactive and threatening to me. A second before I woke up, screaming, I saw the city. I spent the entire following day doing nothing but rotting on the couch, wrapped in blankets and trying to distract myself with television. My ex-wife didn't answer her phone, no matter how many times I texted or called her. It wasn't the first time I had fantasized of taking a razor blade and ending this whole shit. But as you can easily see, I'm still here. And there's a reason for that. I think I've stared at the picture that was taken when my little boy was born for at least an hour. My wife was on it, Tom, and the man I used to be. I turned off the TV. I got up, and for the first time in forever, I went to bed voluntarily and sober. It was only 8 o'clock. I wanted to finish dreaming my nightmare. This time, I saw the ruins of the city more clearly, even though the sun was just setting. They were just as yellow as the desert, but anything but human. They looked like a large biological construct of many creatures forming misshapen buildings similar to corals. In some places I could see dried up veins and congelated slime sticking to the foundations. Again, I flew over this contaminated world in my dream, and for the first time I could see life in this place. It was no more familiar than the architecture. Do you know what an ecological niche is? In short, this is how you call environmental factors that can be used by species to develop in a new direction. For example, if all the big cats in Africa were to die out, the niche of the primary predator would be free, and other carnivores or omnivore species, such as rats or baboons, could fill this gap and become the new rulers of the Serengeti. Tom once explained it to me in more detail. What does that have to do with the creatures of these ruins? Well, as I saw them crawling out of the entrances of their homes, a horrible thought experience shot through my head. What if all life, except for humans, dies out, and we, in our greed for perfection, artificially adapt to the niches, divide into different species that now had to be crammed together in this place because the rest of the earth is irradiated. Believe me, I saw things. A woman with a pig's face and unnaturally long fingers was being torn apart by a pack of dog people with hideous warts all over their body. A reptilian creature with a spherical body and too many limbs ran vertically up the wall of a house, chasing fist-sized cockroaches. Beside me, a girl with a bat torso shot into the twilight, screaming, a dead rat with a human face hanging from her claws. Her silhouette was outlined like a paper cut against the smoking full moon. These things seemed to be fighting blood feuds with each other. But I flew on, unseen, unnoticed, unstoppable. In the middle of the city was a large yellow tower, which I finally steered towards, overgrown with what looked like rotting tentacles. I passed through its wall without even scratching the structure. Inside sat a dozen red-clad sheep-human hybrids, kneeling in a circle, singing with grotesque bleating voices and praying to a pillar, on top of which stood a bust of a man, a real man. Fortunately, his face was too weathered for me to recognize. But even in this place, I didn't stay long. I flew on faster and faster into the interior of the tower. The singing of the sheep and the screaming from the creatures on the streets mixed in my head to a painful mush of sound, but I couldn't cover my ears, couldn't move. I was like in a trance. Minutes of wandering turned into what felt like hours, maybe even days, until finally I could no longer make out contours or sound. There was only the singing, the screaming, and the yellow. And suddenly, silence. I was no longer flying. I was not standing upright. I was simply a disembodied consciousness, a thought in the void. And before me rose it. Up to this point, I have tried to describe the creatures in the city, to you as best as I could. But this creature stood above my vocabulary and above my imagination. What I mean is that there is no way to describe it to you more accurately. Believe me, I looked it up in the dictionary. There is nothing I can compare it to. It was not human. It was not an animal. And it was nothing in between. This monstrosity before me was vaguely humanoid, wearing something like a tunic in an unspeakable color. And it was huge. So big that it almost filled my entire field of vision. But its face... I'm sorry. I can't explain that. Unless you have several hours of time. The only thing I'm sure about this creature is that it was very old. Older than anything humanity knows. Perhaps millions or even billions of years. But still, I also knew that its creation was still far in the future, when nothing of our Earth would be left. And then, the thing spoke to me. You must destroy the Creator. Its voice thundered across the nothingness. This creature spoke extremely loudly, but so calmly as if it were whispering in my ear. Every word was clearly understandable, and the emphasis was more like a math teacher than a supernatural entity. It continued.
He is the first and the last of the flesh gods. He did not listen to me. He laughed when I pleaded with him not to fire the cold weapons. He laughed. He laughed. He must destroy him before he can destroy this world. You are the last hope of your Earth. These ruins must not be the last.
By now, every word seemed to be causing this monster pain. Its face, or what I thought was it, contorted as it roared the same sentence over and over again. All the former calmness wiped away.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
I woke up. I didn't scream. I wasn't in pain. Blood was running from my nose. I suddenly felt a deep sense of peace and endless fatigue. Even though I had seen hell, all I wanted at that moment was undisturbed, dreamless sleep. It didn't have to wait long. After a short time, I managed to fall asleep again. But before I closed my eyes, I swore one thing to myself. I would ignore this monster's command, never think about this again, and live my life as best as I could. A feeling told me that this torture was finally over, and I was right. I never dreamed of the yellow ruins again. When my wife came back, she gave me another chance. I took it. My boss rehired me. My son made friends. I slowly found my way back to life, and I managed to forget as best as I could. That was 2 years ago now. It's summer, and I'm sitting in the garden on a picnic blanket with the love of my life. We are expecting a second child. Tom is lying in the grass opposite of me. Of course, he's reading again. It's a book about genetic engineering.